Long before Rowan was born, the supernatural world was one of fear and power, a delicate balance between two mighty forces, the vampires and the witches. The vampires, who thrived on blood and lived in the shadows of humanity, were feared for their immortality and their fierce strength. The witches, gifted with ancient magic, wielded control over nature, time, and life itself. For centuries, both races coexisted under a fragile truce, each side keeping their distance, knowing that the other could destroy them at a moment's notice. But that balance was shattered. A group of witches, led by a faction of old, power-hungry elders, broke the most sacred of covenants, killing an elder vampire. This act of betrayal, driven by jealousy and greed, ignited a war that would ravage the land. For years, the vampires and witches clashed, their battles leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. Cities were burned, families torn apart, and the world became a battlefield for those who should have been allies. Amidst the chaos, an ancient prophecy surfaced, whispered through the winds and shadows. A child will be born of both witch and vampire blood. The child will possess the power to end the war, bring peace, or destroy both sides. The witches feared this child. They saw it as the one who could undo everything they had fought for, everything they had built. And so, they sought to destroy him before he could rise. But the prophecy's fulfillment was inevitable. The child was born. The witch's sacrifice. Seraphina, a powerful witch with a heart torn between her duty and her love, gave birth to the child foretold. Rowan was his name, a baby wrapped in the purest magic, a child destined to wield untold power. But with his birth came tragedy. Seraphina knew that the coven would come for him, that the witches who had once been her allies would hunt down her son as a threat to their reign. In a desperate act of protection, Seraphina cast a spell, one so strong that it would shield Rowan from the coven's sight. She placed him in the care of a human couple, Margaret and David, who lived in a quiet, peaceful town, far from the reach of the witch's influence. The spell was meant to last for 23 years, keeping Rowan hidden and safe until he was old enough to understand his powers. Seraphina's last words to her son were whispered through the magic, echoing in his ears as she faded into nothingness. "You are my hope, Rowan. Live! Find the peace the world so desperately needs. But remember, there is darkness in you too, and it will seek you." With that, Rowan was gone from the coven's sight, hidden away in the home of the loving couple who would raise him as their own. Rowan grew up in the peaceful town of Evergreen, raised by his loving adoptive parents, Margaret and David. Margaret, the owner of a large and successful boutique, doted on Rowan and often brought him to work, where he helped fold fabrics or greet customers. David, a history professor, spent his evenings sharing stories of ancient civilizations, fostering Rowan's curiosity and love for books. Their home was filled with warmth and laughter, and Rowan wanted for nothing. He excelled in school, though he often felt different from his peers, quieter, more introspective. Strange things sometimes happened around him. Plants in the garden would thrive unusually well under his care, and lights flickered when he was upset. His parents dismissed these incidents as coincidences, but Rowan couldn't shake the feeling that something about him was unusual. Despite these oddities, Rowan's childhood was one of love, security, and endless encouragement. Margaret and David gave him a world of possibilities, preparing him for a future he couldn't yet imagine. The week before his 23rd birthday felt different to Rowan, though he couldn't explain why. The peaceful rhythms of his life in Evergreen felt distant, as if he were watching from outside himself. He grew quieter, more withdrawn, and spent more time by the window, staring at the world beyond. Margaret noticed his restlessness. "You've been sitting there for hours," she said one evening. "Is something bothering you?" Rowan shook his head, trying to smile. "I don't know. I just feel strange." David, ever the practical one, tried to reassure him. "It's probably just your imagination. Big birthdays have a way of making us feel like something's changing," but Rowan wasn't convinced. It wasn't excitement or anxiety. It was something else. He felt a pull towards something he couldn't name, an invisible thread tugging at his very soul. On his birthday, Margaret and David went out of their way to make it special. Margaret baked his favorite cake, and David gifted him an antique compass he'd found during a recent trip. Rowan tried to enjoy the evening, but a strange heaviness lingered. His thoughts were distant, and even the laughter of his parents couldn't shake the growing unease in his chest. That night, after his parents had gone to bed, Rowan sat in the living room, staring at the compass. The needle spun erratically, as if searching for something. He frowned, shaking it gently, but it wouldn't settle. The dream came again when he finally slept, the fiery-haired woman standing in a field of golden light. "It's time," she whispered, her voice filled with sorrow. "Be ready." The day after his birthday, Rowan woke with a deep sense of foreboding. He spent most of the day restless, pacing between his room and the garden. Margaret suggested he get some fresh air, but even that didn't help. As night fell, Rowan sat by his window, staring at the moonlit streets of Evergreen. The quiet of the town felt too still, too unnatural. Then it happened. A faint shimmer in the air caught his attention. Before he could react, the shimmer expanded, forming into a glowing circle etched with runes. It pulsed once, then disappeared, leaving the room unnervingly silent. Rowan stood abruptly, but his legs buckled beneath him. A sudden wave of weakness swept over him, and his vision blurred. He tried to call out for his parents, but no sound escaped his lips. Shadows moved in the corners of the room, and 3 hooded figures emerged, their steps silent as death. "He's weakened," one of them said in a low voice. The second witch raised a hand, casting another spell that bound Rowan's arms to his sides. He tried to fight, but his strength was gone, drained by the magic they'd used to subdue him. "Careful," the third witch warned. "We need him intact." Rowan's mind raced, but his body betrayed him. He couldn't even muster the energy to stand. As the witches moved closer, the lead one murmured an incantation, and the world around Rowan shifted. The room dissolved into darkness, and the last thing he saw was the faint glow of their magic before everything faded away. Margaret and David slept soundly that night, unaware their son was gone, taken by the witches who left no trace of their presence. Rowan's days in captivity bled into one another, each one marked by searing pain and cruel silence. The witches, cold and methodical, worked in shifts, draining him of his blood, each drop taken leaving him weaker, more fatigued. The enchanted chains around his wrists hummed with dark magic, sapping the energy from his body, but they couldn't touch the power inside him. During one of the many torment sessions, the silver-eyed witch approached, her hands adorned with rings that shimmered as she waved them over him. "You're stubborn," she sneered, her fingers tracing the bruises on his face. "We'll break you eventually, boy. The ritual is inevitable." Rowan clenched his jaw, refusing to show the pain he felt. His bloodied hands were shackled to the cold stone floor, and the witches took their time, relishing every moment of his suffering. "I don't care what you think," he spat, his voice hoarse. "You're wrong about me." The witch smirked, her fingers digging into his skin. "You'll see. We'll own you soon enough. We'll make you more powerful than you ever imagined, and you'll serve us." Rowan's vision swam as she cut another wound into his side, but the pain was nothing compared to the fire that simmered beneath his ribs. He refused to give them the satisfaction of breaking him. It was the 22nd night, after another brutal session, that Rowan heard a faint sound, a creak of the heavy door to his cell. His heart skipped a beat, and for a moment he thought it was another round of torment. But when he lifted his head, a figure stood in the doorway. "Elira," he croaked, his throat raw. The witch's face was drawn with determination, her usually cold eyes now flickering with something else, something akin to regret. She didn't answer right away, but quickly approached, muttering a quiet incantation. The chains binding him snapped open. "Get up," she commanded, her voice firm but low. Rowan blinked, confused, unsure of what was happening. He tried to rise but stumbled, his legs weak from the blood loss. "Why are you doing this?" he rasped, glaring at her. "You've been one of them. I'm not your enemy," Elira replied quickly, her eyes darting toward the door. But you are. And you're not meant to die here. I'm giving you a chance. Rowan's mind raced. He was still too weak to run, but something in her voice made him believe her. What do you want from me? She knelt beside him, her voice barely a whisper. I want you to get out of here. That's all. You don't have to trust me, but if you stay, they'll destroy you. Destroy everything. Rowan's chest tightened. I don't even know where I am or how to get out. Alira, don't do this, he said, but she cut him off. Don't waste time questioning it. You need to go. Now. Before they realize what I've done. Without another word, she touched his forehead lightly, muttering another spell that dissolved the protective wards around the lair. The air shifted, and the oppressive weight of magic eased. You're free. You'll need to move quickly. Go, Rowan. Rowan didn't hesitate. His body felt like it was moving through mud, his blood still too thin and his muscles aching. But the thought of freedom spurred him forward. He stumbled through the dark corridors of the lair, the walls damp and cold under his fingertips. The witch's preparations for the blood-red moon were happening all around him, but Rowan had no idea how much time he had before they noticed his absence. When he reached the surface, he didn't stop. The world outside was nothing like he expected. A dense forest stretched out before him, the trees whispering in the wind, but there was no path, no guide. Just endless darkness. He looked back once, but Alira had already disappeared, leaving him with nothing but the faintest feeling of hope. And then, without thinking, Rowan ran. Rowan ran through the forest, his chest heaving with each strained breath. The pain from the blood loss, the lingering weakness from the tortures, slowed him down, but he didn't stop. His instincts screamed at him to keep moving, to flee from whatever dark magic the witches had waiting for him. The moon, now red in the sky, cast an eerie glow over the trees, making everything feel distorted, as though the world itself was closing in on him. The trees stretched higher, darker, until the landscape became a blur of shadow and whispering winds. His legs were giving out, but his will kept him going, pushing forward deeper into the woods. Then he saw it. It was an ancient mansion, standing tall amidst the dark, towering trees. The air around it seemed to hum with power, and for a moment, Rowan wasn't sure if it was real. The mansion was obscured by some kind of magic, a spell so strong that mortal eyes couldn't see it. But Rowan wasn't mortal. His body screamed in exhaustion, but something inside of him, something deep and ancient, pulled him toward it. It was as though the mansion was calling to him, like the very walls were reaching out, telling him he had no choice but to enter. He staggered toward the gate, his vision blurry. With a shaky hand, he pushed open the heavy wrought iron gates that led up to the front door, feeling a strange warmth radiate from the building. Something shifted in the air around him, and as he stepped closer to the door, it creaked open as if it had been waiting for him. Inside, the mansion was massive, dark wood panels lining the walls and the faint scent of aged wine and incense filling the air. The dimly lit hallway seemed to stretch on forever, but there was no one to greet him. The house felt empty, yet not in an eerie way. It was as if the place itself was alive and watching him, waiting. Rowan barely had the strength to walk, but something inside of him, a pull, a connection, urged him onward. He stumbled through the halls, his senses heightened despite his exhaustion. His mind raced. Where was he? Why was he here? And then, just as he thought he might collapse, he heard it. A voice, deep and commanding, but laced with a strange softness. You're far from where you should be, little one. Rowan's body froze, a chill running through his veins at the sound. The voice came from behind him. Slowly, he turned around, his heart pounding in his chest, his blood still sluggish and weak. And there, standing in the shadows of a doorway, was a man. Tall, imposing, with eyes that gleamed like molten gold, as if they had seen centuries pass. His dark hair cascaded down his shoulders in waves, and his presence was so overwhelming that Rowan's legs buckled beneath him. The man stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as they fixed on Rowan. There was something unearthly about him, something Rowan couldn't quite place, but there was no mistaking the strange, magnetic pull that surged through Rowan's chest when their gazes met. His heart hammered, as if his very soul recognized the stranger. "Who are you?" Rowan rasped, his voice raw and weak. The man, this vampire, took another step closer, his eyes flashing with a strange, unreadable expression. "I am Alaric," the man said, his voice like velvet, but there was a sharp edge to it. "King of the vampires. And you are the one I have been waiting for." Rowan blinked, trying to steady his breathing. His mind was reeling. "Waiting for? What do you mean? I don't understand." Alaric's gaze softened, though the intensity of it never wavered. "You are the chosen one, Rowan, the one spoken of in the prophecy. But you are also my mate, my soul mate." Rowan's heart stopped, and for a brief moment, he thought he might pass out from the shock. He had heard the whispers, heard of the prophecies, but he never believed them to be real. And certainly, he had never believed that he was the one meant to end the war between the witches and vampires. "But why?" Rowan whispered, more to himself than to Alaric. "I don't know anything. I've only just—" "Chill." Alaric's voice cut through the air, soothing and powerful. "I know. You've been through much, Rowan. Too much. But I have waited for this moment for you. I knew the time would come, but I didn't expect it to be you." Rowan staggered forward, the words still not making sense. His mind was swimming with too many questions. He wanted to run, to escape this fate that seemed too big to accept, but his body betrayed him. He was too weak. "You are not weak," Alaric said, his voice firm, but with an underlying note of something else. Concern, maybe? "I feel your power, Rowan. The magic inside of you is incredible. They've tried to break you, but you are far stronger than they think. We'll help you unlock it. Together." Rowan's knees buckled, and Alaric was there in an instant, his powerful hands catching him before he could hit the ground. The connection between them flared, a bond neither of them could deny. Rowan's breath caught in his throat as the pull between them grew stronger, like a tether between their very souls. "You're not alone anymore," Alaric whispered, his voice tender but full of strength. "I won't let them hurt you again." The words hit Rowan harder than any blow he'd received. And though he still didn't fully understand it all, he felt it, felt the undeniable truth of their connection, as if the world itself had conspired to bring them together. Alaric pulled him close, supporting him with ease as they stood there in the heart of the ancient mansion. Outside, the blood-red moon rose higher in the sky, a silent witness to the beginning of a new chapter in Rowan's life. The war was far from over, but with Alaric, the king of vampires, by his side, he would face it, for the first time, with a sense of hope.